Here we are. Shalom, shalom, welcome. We're just getting things set up here as we get started. So it's great to see you. Shalom, welcome. I'm Rabbi Scott with Beth Yeshua Messianic Synagogue, and I'm here for our midweek meeting of Torah, going through the Torah portion for each week, and talking about it, discussing it. As always, if you want to send me an email or a text, we can discuss these things and dig in further, and would love to do that with you. You can find contact information on our YouTube channel or on our Facebook page. So we're going to begin this week's Torah portion. This week is again another double parshiot, two portions, two parshas in this week's parsha. It is Acharei Mot, which means after the death of, or after the death, in Vayikra, Leviticus chapter 16 through 18. And then the next parsha is Kedoshim, which means holy ones, Vayikra, Leviticus, again, chapter 19 and 20. We'll begin kind of going through the Torah portion, highlighting and maybe spending a little time on some of the bits and pieces, and as we do that, and then we'll try to go back over and dig in a little deeper on it. So let's begin. Beginning with, don't come in at any time into the most holy place, Adonai says, so that you do not die. And so is laid out in Leviticus, Vayikra chapter 16. There is this complex ceremony which is called the avodah, which is this ceremony of the high priest going into the most holy place. This is the only time that the high priest is to go in to the most holy place, and this is how he is to do it. And so it goes through this complex ceremony, and it says this in the text: in this way you come into the sanctuary. And then throughout that ceremony, the high priest is to make offerings, sin offerings. We have references to his holy garments, his special garments that he wears. We have references to these two goats, one of which is a sin offering, and the other is called the scapegoat. This one is released into the wilderness. The Kohen Gadol makes atonement for him and for his house, and then eventually for the most holy place, and then eventually for all the people of Israel. The bowl offering is brought and also sacrificed. There are changes of clothes. The Kohen Gadol changes his clothes and bathes himself with water between the changes. At one point, he confesses the sins of the people on the head of the scapegoat, the surviving goat. And previous to that, we have this thing where lots are cast to see which goat is going to be the sin offering and which goat is going to be the scapegoat. The scapegoat is traditionally tied with a red thread around its neck and is determined to be the goat that is led into the wilderness. There's lots cast for these for which goat is going to be which, and then of course the other goat is the sin offering, and the bowl is offering also the sin offering. It says in verse 34 that this will be an everlasting statute for you, that you will do this ceremony on the 7th month of the 10th day, that you will afflict your souls, that you will do no work, and that this applies to both the native and the sojourner, the foreigner who lives among you. It is to be a Shabbat of solemn rest. It is an eternal statute to make atonement for all their sins once per year. And so we who are coming at this from a Messianic perspective, from Yeshua, we have to read that text at face value and acknowledge that there is something to this statute that is eternal. This is an eternal observance for you. In some way, we are to still be observing this day, and that is after that Yeshua has accomplished our ultimate atonement and has completed our ultimate atonement, but that yet we still are to observe this day. It's called Yom Kippur on the calendar. Also that this day was to make atonement for all their sins, that this was a day of atonement, and that atonement would be made. And again, the dilemma for those in the Messianic community is this idea that Yeshua is our ultimate atonement, but we are still called upon to exercise atonement in this way. So this is a little bit of the sort of dynamic, the tension, if you will, of dealing with the truth, the words of the text, which are valid and eternal and truthful, and we have to process these words and come to grips with these words and process them in a way that starts with their validity. The words are valid, the words are truthful. If there's any confusion, the confusion may be justified, but we have to approach it at least from the acknowledgement that this is a word of God, that it was to be a eternal statute, and that it was to make atonement for their sins. All right. Then chapter 17, this is all in chapter 16 of Vayikra. Chapter 17 speaks about making sacrifices away from the Mishkan, that you're not to make sacrifices away from the Mishkan, that you're to make sure that your sacrifices are in at the front of the altar of the tent of meeting there. Later, this applies to the temple, the place of Adonai's name. It is the shedding of blood that occurs in these sacrifices, and it speaks also of any sacrifices that are made away from the tent, that person shall be cut off. If you make these sacrifices away from the presence, the Hamikdash, the place of the presence of Adonai, that person would be cut off. Then it goes in to speak of blood. Do not any of the blood, the life of the creature is in the blood, that when you hunt for food, that you must cover the blood, or that when you sacrifice for food, or when you butcher an animal for food, that you are to cover the shed blood with dirt, and then you're to not eat something that dies naturally. The blood must be shed, must be shed out upon the ground as part of your preparing the animal to be eaten. We have this from the book Messianic Jews in the Brit Chadashah, Hebrews, chapter 9. It says, apart from the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness. That aside from the shedding of blood, there's no forgiveness of sins. Different translations say it. Remember Cain, after the murder of his brother, Adonai says, the blood of your brother cries out to me from the ground. We have to, in Bereshit, Genesis chapter 4, we have to acknowledge that there's something happening with the blood that has some sort of interaction with Adonai. The shed blood is somehow connecting with Adonai, if you will. The text says that the life is in the blood, the nefesh is in the blood, and that applies not just to human beings, but it also applies to the animals, such that blood retains some sort of its life dynamic even after it is shed, such that it would be very important for us to cover the shed blood with dirt as a matter of respect, as a form of burial. In the same way that you bury a person, you also cover up with the dirt the shed blood. For the animal that dies naturally, it is not butchered at the hands of a person. You're not to eat of it. If you do eat of it, you'll be unclean. Why? Because the shedding of blood must be done intentionally and consciously. We are acknowledging the life and the life that is poured out on the ground, and that now we're going to eat of that flesh, eat of that animal. We human beings need to acknowledge that because we know about the blood. We know that the life is in the blood. And so when we eat of an animal without being conscious of the life that was in the blood, in a sense, we are dismissing the life that was. We're dismissing the life that Adonai gave to that animal. we're dismissing. It's almost as if we're being indifferent to the life that was, if we are not somehow conscious of this blood that's shed out of this animal, this animal that gives up its life for us. We understand, we know that the blood is about the life, and the shedding of blood is for the forgiveness, the remission of sins. And so even more so than just understanding it from a biological sense, most of us understand that the blood runs through our veins and that's how we live, and if our heart stops pumping, the body doesn't live. If we cut ourselves and the blood pours out, we don't live. We understand it from a biomechanical perspective. And then I think we understand it because we understand that there is life in that blood, that the existentiality of that being's life, whether it be a human being or an animal, is somehow in that blood. And the life poured out, it means the blood poured out means the life is poured out and the life is extinguished. Carry that one step further, and we arrive at the blood that's poured out is for the remission of sins. The blood that's poured out is for the forgiveness of sins. And we are given this example of the animal's blood that's poured out for the forgiveness of sins. And it is understood that way as a pointer, though, to Yeshua, whose blood was poured out as a final work of atonement, as an absolute work of atonement, fully completing the work of atonement for all of humanity. Okay, moving on. Chapter 18 has a lot of purity laws, family relations laws, sexual laws, and rules on family relationships. And then we move on down to that we're not to sacrifice a child. A child is not to be sacrificed to Molech. Some of the native peoples in the land of Canaan were sacrificing, making child sacrifices. There were other cultures that made child sacrifices during that time. But Adonai says you're not to sacrifice a child. A child has a place in the family. The child has a role. It belongs there. And to sacrifice it is to take it, to remove it from its family, and to remove it from its place, its valid place in that family. And then we move on to the nidah rules and regulations, the uncleanness, the tumeh of a woman during her menstrual cycle. Again, within the intimacy of the family, we have this greater sense of propriety, of boundary, of modesty, of purity. For example, according to the text, in a very simple reading of this text here in this chapter, my daughter's modesty is even more sacred than another woman's modesty. That it's considered even more revered and honored and protected. These are examples of how our children, our parents, we need to have an even greater sense of boundary and protection and covering. Now, I will say this, just by way of a hint, that if you want to go deeper with this, remembering that it is the kapara that is the covering for sin, it is the kippurim, Yom Kippur, the kippur, which is the covering of sin, the Day of Atonement, the Kippur, the Day of Covering, Day of Atonement. And then we have this language here in this chapter speaking of having her nakedness uncovered. Having her, and by word of nakedness, I think in terms of modesty, privacy, the secret of the private nature of a person's identity is uncovered, as opposed to the private sins which are covered. There are things which are open that need to be covered. There are things that are covered and hidden that need to be opened so that they can be covered. Our sin, which begins as a secret, all of our sins begin as a secret. All of our sins are committed in the secret place of our heart when they begin with desire, and they sprout and bloom into an act. But nearly all sins begin with some sort of moment of intentional desire. It may be a very quick moment. for those of us who maybe lose our temper quickly, or take something that doesn't belong to us without thinking. That moment of desire may be a very, very brief moment. But I believe that all sin begins in a moment of desire in some capacity or another, and that when that desire comes to blossom, to fruition, is the act of when we do the act of transgression. But that's why I say that all sin begins as a secret. It begins as something that is covered in the dark place of our heart. It is then revealed through either our confession or just the consequence of our sin. And then it is placed under Yeshua, and his blood covers our sin. So that which was hidden is then revealed and then covered under atonement. And we are allowed to live without the stain of that sin in us or on us. But in contrast to our modesty, remember it says that Noah was uncovered in his tent. He dishonored himself and he revealed himself. He uncovered himself. This idea of our nakedness being uncovered and revealed is something that we need to protect and cover up. It speaks to that area of a person's dignity as a human being. Okay. Going on with the text here in this chapter, it says, if we sin in these ways, that we will defile the land. What is it that we do when we make the sacrifice? What is it that we do when we harvest the animal, when we kill the animal for food? We pour out the blood, the life, the nefesh is poured out on the land. But our sin has the same effect of being poured out on the land, and it is said that it defiles the land. If we murder and spill blood, we defile the land. The blood of our victim defiles the land. If we sacrifice an animal and its blood is poured out at the base of the altar, that is holy and that is good. What does this mean? The land does not have a soul, but it has an essence. In a similar way, metaphorically, we talk about the rocks and trees crying out in worship to Adonai. Of course, we know that rocks and trees don't have a voice, but in a sense, the rocks and trees do have a worshipful expression, if you will. It's not in words and sounds as us. It's much more base or simple expression of glory to Adonai. The expression of glory to Adonai might be described as beauty, it might be described as wonder, it might be described as awe, but it's still an expression of worship to Adonai. This land does not have a soul, it does not have an expression per se in words and sounds, but it does have an expression that somehow Adonai hears. And the land is a partner in our good, in what we do. That is, when we sin, we defile the land, and the land wants to vomit us out. Whereas if we do good, we become a blessing to the land. There's something there that's metaphorical, but there's something there that's actual as well. It's in a sense the land will reject you if you sin openly and without confession. All right, that kind of summarizes or walks through a little bit of the first portion, parsha, the Acharei Mot. Next, we have the Kedoshim, which means holy ones. Begins with respecting your father and mother, to not take any idols for idolatry, and we continue with just kind of a sampling, if you will, of kind of diverse laws, rules, regulations. Don't take away things for yourself. Remember the widows and the foreigners with the corners of your field. Do not steal. Do not lie. A question for you: when it comes to stealing and lying, from whom does a normal person steal? Who do we steal from? Who do we take from? To whom does a person take from? We always steal from somebody over whom we have advantage. And maybe that advantage is in terms of our own self-deception. But we always take something either from a position of advantage. In other words, if you have the classic stereotype of the evil landowner who is exploiting his tenants He is stealing from his tenants because he is in a position to. He's in a position of advantage. They're in a position of poverty. They have no power. They have no resources with which to fight back, and he can take advantage of them. From whom do we lie? Or to whom do we tell lies? We tell lies to people to whom we feel in our hearts that we have an advantage, that somehow our lies are necessary because we're in a position of advantage with them. Sometimes you might think that you can tell a lie because you're in a position of desperate. You're desperate. You're in a desperate position or desperate place, and you will need to do something to save yourself or something to this effect. But there's always an advantage position by which you feel you're justified in telling your lie, that you either know more than the other person, or that you somehow this is expedient or necessary. So we also go on with some rules and regulations about swearing by the name of Adonai, swearing by any other name falsely, which is again another form of lying. We're not to oppress our neighbors, not to curse the deaf, hamper the blind, do no injustice, do not be partial, decide with fairness. All these things assume a position of advantage or authority or power over the other one. And then we have this: do not hate in your heart. All of this assuming a sense of condescension, like when you hate somebody in your heart, you're looking down on them. It's you have a condescending attitude towards people. You feel like you're above them. The commentators, the sages, will talk about this idea, do not hate in your heart, as being a phrase where you would have contempt for somebody, but you wouldn't show them. In fact, the sages use this image of smiling while you hate somebody in your heart, and how terrible that is. Again, all these things assume a position of power or advantage. It says not to cut the edges of your beard, rounding the edges of the hair on your head. The idea being that if you can see your hair out of the corner of your eye, it trains you to be mindful of the fringes. It trains you to be mindful of the things that we see on the edges. In the same way that Ruth was gleaning on the edges of Boaz's field, he was mindful of her, and he was mindful of her need, her desperate circumstance, and so he provided for her to glean from the edges of the fields, and he even provided abundantly for her. But it's this idea that we are training ourselves to be mindful of those who are under disadvantage, those who are under difficulty or stress, those who are poor, those who are victimized, those who don't have resources, those who are sick. Again, this idea of training ourselves to be mindful of those who are on the fringe. It speaks of standing in the presence of elders with respect and with reverence, and to not do any wrong to an outsider, to not be dishonest in judgment. And again, all these rules and regulations, which can be viewed largely in the context of having an advantage over someone. Chapter 20, Vayikra, do not do child sacrifice. Again, the children belonging to the community. Cursing the parents, the adultery. Speaking of nakedness again, in the Nidah. Nidah is the menstrual purity laws. Keeping all of Adonai's statutes, and then making distinctions between clean and unclean for foods. The sorcerer is to be put to death, and so that's kind of the summary of chapter 20. And these laws again could be viewed perhaps somewhat in the lens of having advantage, but more specifically, I think you could view these as laws about community. The child belongs to the community. Your parents belong to the community. They have their own roles and their own place in the community. Adultery is always a sin against the community because we assume to be living in community with each other. So if man takes another man's wife, he has sinned against the community, has taken something that doesn't belong to him because she has her place in the community as his wife. Again, the nidah, the uncleanness, there is a sense of community about that because of the cautions that are needed for a woman during that period, and the nakedness again being the modesty that is necessary in any community. Every community needs standards of modesty and in order to function properly. A lot of this is just setting up boundaries for what is mine and what is yours and what is ours. We don't want to take from somebody else's boundary, from somebody else's territory, from somebody else's land. We don't want to take from somebody else's house. We don't want them to take from our house. But then there are community areas, there are communal areas between houses where we do things together. And this is the nature of community. In fact, all of communal life has to have a sense of mine, a sense of yours, and a sense of ours. So that's what we see here played out in this portion. All right, reviewing where we are in the Torah, we have had the completion of the Mishkan. They spent a year or so building the Mishkan, the tent of meeting, the tabernacle. We had the dedications of the priests and their clothes and the utensils, the basins, the lavers, the accessories, all the utensils and accessories of the tabernacle, the furnishings. After this complex and thorough dedication, we were prepared, and the presence of Adonai came, and at one point was seen by all the people. He stood there in the midst of all the people. Only the second time in the Torah where we have this all the people testimony of the appearance of Adonai in their midst. But immediately after this, we have the episode of Nadav and Avihu, the two eldest sons of Aaron, who rush into the most holy place and who bring strange fire into the most holy place, and they were put to death by fire from Adonai. And then we have this idea of Tumah and Tahara, the unclean and the clean, the woman who gives birth to a child, and the ritual, the purification ritual. And then we had the other uncleanness that you get from the Metzorah, what we call leprosy, the uncleanness from emissions and discharges, etc. And then we come to the opening line of this week's portion. Adonai spoke to Aaron after the death of his two sons. Don't come in at any time into the temple. This is how you are to come, and this is when you are to come. And then it says this very, very emphatically, so that you will not die. There's almost a sense in which the death was unavoidable, that Nadav and Avihu rushed into the presence of Adonai, and their death was almost unavoidable. There's a sense in which this is all a reset. It's as if Nadav and Avihu did what came naturally to their self-absorbed sort of existence, their perspective, and they rushed into the presence of Adonai, and they died. And in one sense, you could interpret it and say, well, what did we expect would happen? What did we think was going to happen? Of course, they were going to rush into it because that's what they were going to do. And then we have this reset, and the parameters for the Kohen Gadol, Aaron, to go into the presence of Adonai had never previously been discussed. It was not part of the narrative. It wasn't part of the instructions. We spend a year building the temple, or building the Mishkan, building the tabernacle, and there was never any discussion. Now, when you finish the tabernacle, the very next thing you're going to want to do is do the Kohen Gadol's outfit, and I'm going to teach you how to get in there. That was never discussed. And I guess you could argue and say, well, they didn't have time. They ran out of time because they jumped the gun. Surely Adonai would have done that. But it does beg the question, why didn't Adonai say to them, okay, now, before you get carried away, yeah, I'm going to be there, and it's my presence, and you're going to be blown away by my presence, and you're going to be intoxicated by the majesty and the glory and the power of Adonai, and you're going to want to rush in. Remember when Adonai came down to dwell on the mountain, when Moshe was going to go up and on Mount Horeb and receive the tablets, what instructions did Adonai give Moshe to give to the people? He said that they are not to approach the mountain. They are not to even come up on its slopes. Why did he do that? Why did he give them that instruction? Because people were inclined to want to go into the majesty, the power, the presence of Adonai. That, again, we spoke of this, I think, last week, about the intoxicating effect of the power of Adonai. But I'm asking the question, and asking you the question, and asking myself the question, really asking the text, why didn't Adonai say that prior to the narrative of Nadav and Avihu? Like, okay, just before we start this week, before we start this special week of sacrifices and sitting and waiting on the presence of Adonai, and the seventh day and then the eighth day, before we get anywhere near that, let me just wave you off and say, before you get carried away, we've got to do things this way. All right. So here's what's happening. It's like Adonai sets up conditions, and then we have something that happens, and it's like, well, hold it, that didn't work. Okay, take two, reset. You could say that the avodah is the description of the ceremony of the high priest going into the Kohen Gadol. We could say that it's a reset. Where else in the Torah do we have a reset? Let's start with creation. In the garden, Adam and Eve are in fellowship with Adonai. They're given all these trees to eat from. We have the tree of life, and we're not sure what the tree of life is for quite yet. We'll probably figure that out real soon. And we have the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and we're told explicitly and emphatically, do not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And what happens? We go and we eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And we've discussed this before. Why did Adonai put the tree there and then tell us not to eat from it? What was the program? What was the purpose of the tree of knowledge if we weren't going to eat from it? And we've talked about maybe the one theory is that at some point we were going to eat from it. It was just going to be in the context of relationship. It was going to be something that flushed itself out in relationship. And so the question is, why did he do that? Well, that's what he did. All right, so Adam and Eve failed in the obvious way, and then we've got a reset. And it's like, oh, okay, we messed up. Take two, reset. The reset is increased pain in childbirth, difficulty working the ground, and conflict in marriage, and we've lost the garden, and now we can't go back into the garden. All right, reset. And then we see moving on from there, where the woman gives birth to the firstborn, and she says, look what I've done with the help of Adonai. Fast forward to the time of Noah. At that time, Noah, the people were wicked and evil. The ground was evil. We had to bring a flood and create a new earth effectively. And this new earth has a new set of rules that might allow life to work a little better. We're allowed to eat meat and some other things that may make life a little easier. We're not entirely and absolutely and exclusively dependent on working the ground for food. Do you see that connection? That Adonai says, okay, you're going to have difficulty working the ground. It's going to bring forth thistles and weeds for you, and you're going to have a hard time getting food out of this. And we go and we live, and we did. We had a hard time getting food. And when Noah was born, the prophecy over Noah was that this is the one who will give us relief from the work of our hands. What were the work of their hands? The work of their hands was the difficulty in working the ground. Noah was going to be the relief for that, and they didn't understand the prophecy that the relief was truly going to come from the salvation of Adonai. But in one sense, working the ground was difficult. It was hard. And so Adonai gives us a reset. He gives us sort of, okay, let's try this again. Let's do this again in a different way. and I'm going to make things a little easier on you and allow you to eat meat. Yeah, you have to take care of animals, and you got to provide for them and this kind of thing. But in one sense, especially if you're a hunter, it's easier to gather meat than it is to plant and weed and water and nurture and harvest. It's certainly easier to go out and hunt for a venison, for a deer, than it is to spend 4 months developing the wheat harvest. The labor is certainly a lot easier to just harvest the wild animal. Okay, so Adonai is bringing a reset. How about another reset? Do we have other resets going throughout the scriptures? We do, and I'll just jump to the chase on this and fast forward this and direct you to the book of Esther. Vashti is called to present herself to the king, and she rejects her calling, and she's banished. Esther is urged to come to the king by Mordecai. She accepts her calling, and she goes into the king. You see the reset? Vashti fails, and there's a reset, and Esther is successful at going into the king. For those of you who want to dig a little deeper, if you want to do a real exercise, see how many parallels you can find between the book of Esther and Leviticus 16, the Avodah, the Vayikra 16. Here's one hint for you. Vashti refused to dress in the clothes. Remember, she was called to wear the royal robes and appear. She refused to wear the clothes and appear. Esther, on the other hand, accepted, put on the special clothes, and then appeared. What did she do when she appeared before the king? What was Esther's purpose in appearing before the king? It was to intercede for salvation for all of her people. What is it that the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, is doing as part of the Avodah? He is putting on special clothing. He is appearing before Adonai. He is expressing confession, making confessions over the goat, in order to bring salvation to all the people of Israel. Okay, that's just one. Go ahead if you like, if you want to take on, I don't know what do we call it, extra credit, I guess. Go through that and see what you can find. If you want to share it with me, it's a fun exercise. I'm not the only one who does this. There's a bunch of commentators on the internet and places you can read about this that connect the Avodah to the story of Purim. We could have a follow-up discussion on this if you like. Send me an email or reach out to me and we could discuss that. We've taught before this idea of the high priest putting on a special garment to enter the holy place. The illustration we use is that of a deep-sea diver. He has to put on a special outfit in order to survive in a hostile environment or an environment that would put him to death. There's no hostility. There's no animus against the deep-sea diver when he's 500 feet below the surface of the waves. I don't know, do they go down 500 feet? Maybe they go down 100 feet, whatever it is, the drillers and welders that go down under the water. The water has no intentional animus. It doesn't have any hard feelings about the diver, but it's very hostile. Likewise, consider the astronaut. There's no animosity in space. We describe space as being very cold, very harsh, and there is a sort of indifference. There's a sort of hatred in the indifference of our environment when our environment is hostile. If I was to be dropped by helicopter in the middle of Antarctica, wearing the clothes I'm wearing now, I would feel that the land had taken its teeth to me and was going to do damage to me. I'd feel like it was personal. The wind rages at you and the ice rages at you, and you feel that there's some sort of personal animus, some sort of personal hostility to it. So we've taught that before, this concept of the high priest putting on special garments. It's not that the most holy place the Holy of Holies, it's not that it's intentionally hostile. There's no animosity from Adonai towards the Kohen Gadol. It's just that if he doesn't put on the right outfit, the right garment, if he doesn't go through the right steps to prepare himself, then when he gets into that most holy place, it is such a foreign environment to him that he's going to die. In the same way, there's no animosity from outer space, but it is such a foreign environment to me that if I step into outer space without the right outfit, without the right preparations, I will die. There's nothing personal about it. It's the nature of being in a hostile or a foreign environment. Okay. That's the concern, because Adonai is most holy, that we see in order for the Kohen Gadol, for the high priest to go in to the most holy place. Consider Yeshua. Consider the garment that Yeshua put on in order to enter the realm of humanity. Now, we have appearances of peculiar figures throughout the Torah. We have Melchizedek, we have Melchizedek, we have the man who spoke to Joseph, giving him instructions on where his brothers were. We have the man who wrestled until daybreak with Jacob. We have the man and the angels who came and visited with Abraham and had a meal with Abraham. We don't have any sense of Adonai sitting down and eating food the way that we do, but we do have a sense of something of the presence of God. We have the presence of Adonai in the garden. Adonai came into the garden in the cool of the day, in the time of the breezes. And we have this. So we have these appearances of what is likely Adonai, or a form thereof. Perhaps Yeshua is the conjecture, and that's acceptable. That's a reasonable conclusion to make, that it is Yeshua who pops up on the stage from time to time. But these are momentary glimpses where it's as if the appearance of Adonai, the appearance of Yeshua, invades our space, and in the same way that an angel will invade our space, and you see it, but then you don't see it because it's spirit. It's from a different realm. There may be angels all around us, and I'm sure that there are. We don't see them because they're from a different realm. They are in effect parallel to us in our space. But Yeshua wasn't that. Yeshua ate, he slept, he lived, he matured, he was born as an infant. We have indications of Yeshua's development. We have indications of weakness, fatigue, and probably indications, certainly you could extrapolate and perceive that there was probably indications of pain during the crucifixion. And certainly indications of distress during the night before the crucifixion, when Yeshua was praying for the Talmudim. So consider that Yeshua put on a special garment in order to enter the realm of humanity. That this world, this physical sphere, in a similar way, Yeshua came to earth as a man, putting on a man-type outfit, this creator king of the universe. And it says this, that he came to earth as a man. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and then the Word became flesh. He became flesh. He put on flesh, in a sense. At the Seder, we see this, that Yeshua takes off his outer garment, and he wraps himself in a different outfit. This is the outfit of a towel. He clothes himself as a servant in order to serve. What do we say about the avodah, the ceremony of Aaron in the holy place, the Kohen Gadol, the high priest? Adonai knows that we are given to failure. He knows that we are prone to making mistakes. And so it's this, that he presents to us the way that it should be, and then he cleans up the mess and gives us a reset when we invariably make a mess of the situation. We see this, that Yeshua gave us his human example of what it meant to live in right alignment and right standing and right discipline with Adonai. Yeshua was a man of discipline. He prayed nightly. He was a man of discipline and obedience. In him was found no fault before the law. He gave us the example of what it means to live as a human being before Adonai. And he gave us an example of what it means to live in community with each other. There are three aspects to our life in community. The first aspect to our life in community is that of the priestly, the Cohen moment, the aspect of the priest. What is it that a priest does? A priest serves both Adonai and other people, mankind. And you stand there as a minister of the truth and the love and the redemption of Adonai. You stand there as a priest, blessing Adonai, but also blessing the people. You stand in a pivotal place. It's like you're the pivot point between Adonai and humanity. That is one aspect of what it means to be in community. We are all priests unto each other, serving each other in a sense, blessing each other. The priest is the one who blesses another. Secondly is the position of student and teacher, the dynamic of rabbi and talmid. The rabbi is the teacher, the talmid is the disciple. And it's not just teaching as in laying out information, it's sharing your life in such a way that the people around you learn from you and learn from the life that you have lived. All of us should be teachers. All of us should be students. All of us should have a dynamic by which we are an example to the people around us, that they can look to us for how to live. And all of us should be looking around us to see how we should be living. All of us should be part of that Talmid dynamic, that student dynamic. It's a second aspect of communal life. The third aspect of communal life is that of service and sacrifice. We are servants unto each other. We serve and we sacrifice for each other. We give unto each other. Yeshua demonstrated all three of these aspects when he was here on earth. He demonstrated all three of these. So this is what we have. Adonai knows that we are prone to failure, and he gives us these resets so that we can turn around and make better use of what Adonai has given us, and that we can get it right. Adonai gives us more regulation and specificity, and then we try again to get it right in the terms of his grace. So this is what we see when we see Yeshua coming to earth as a man, putting on this garment as a man, living in this realm as a man, in a way for us to see what it's going to take for us to enter the realm of the presence of Adonai. Our entrance into the presence of Adonai is going to be expressions of the Kohen, the priestly moment, the Talmid, the disciple moment, and the sacrifice, the Olah, the offering, the Olah moment, where we give ourselves. Remember, the Olah offering is the ultimate expression of giving something up, of relinquishing something for yourself. And I may be teaching on this on Shabbat, so perhaps this will be a preview of where we end up with our message on Shabbat. But it comes down to this, that the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, who is performing the avodah, which is the ceremony of the Yom Kippur, this ceremony of sacrifice, this is an expression of the high priest as an olah, as an ultimate offering. The text calls it a burnt offering in English, and what that's referring to is that the entirety of the offering, except for the unclean parts of the meat, the rest of it is placed on the altar, and it is entirely consumed. It is all burnt up. There's nothing left for the priest to eat. There's nothing left for the person who brings the sacrifice to eat. Remember the chatat offering and the shlamim offering. The chatat offering is eaten by the priest. That is for sin. And the priest eats a portion of the meat, and the rest of it is burned up on the altar. The shlamim offering, the peace offering, is where we all eat together. I bring the sacrifice, but it's a kind of peace offering. Remember, one of the best examples of the shlamim, the peace offering, is our marriage covenant, where we come together and we all bring a sacrifice together. My wife and I bring a sacrifice together, sacrificing of ourselves so that we can all we can both benefit from each other. Okay, so this is what we see, is we see the Kohen Gadol and the avodah, the ceremony, being the ultimate expression of an olah offering. Yeshua came to earth as an olah offering, giving up of himself entirely for our sin to be consumed entirely. And he also performed if you want to take it a step further, you can see that Yeshua was all three. He was the olah offering, he was the chatat offering, and he was the shlamim offering. We see the shlamim offering where he says, "Take this is my body," at the Seder, the Rabbi's Seder, prior to the crucifixion. But what I want you to see is, I want you to see that the rite of the Kohen Gadol is the practice of that. He is entirely an olah offering. His life is like an olah offering in that moment. Okay, moving on. I want to introduce another concept to you, and this is a concept that is borrowed from others, so I don't take any sort of credit for this whatsoever. There's a number of places you can find this teaching on the internet and books and so forth. The narrative of humanity, the narrative of people, examined from the perspective of land or property. So consider society. Imagine I have a community. Imagine I live in a community, and I have my property, and then I have my neighbors, and we have our property, and our neighbors have property, and we have boundary stones and corners, and so we know where their property is. But we have a lake. We have a lake and a little beach in common, and the lake is shared. We're allowed use of the lake. So consider this from the perspective of Nadav and Avihu, the sons of Aaron who went into the presence of Adonai. It'd be like if they went into their neighbor's property to take what didn't belong to them, to set up and to abide in a place, to take up residence in a place that didn't belong to them. It's as if I were to walk into my neighbor's house with, say, a pound of ground beef, and I start frying up a hamburger on their grill. I'm presumptuous. I'm taking ownership and residence. I'm using something that doesn't belong to me. Consider the tree in the garden, in the story of the garden, Bereshit, Genesis. We went into our neighbor's property, Adonai's property, and we took from his tree. I don't know, but I can imagine the tree had a little circle around it, the way trees often do, that defines kind of that tree's area. And if you were wise, you wouldn't even go into that area. You wouldn't even go into the drip line of the tree. You wouldn't even go past the boundary line of the tree, so to speak, because you'd want to not go there. It doesn't belong to you. But Adam and Eve did go from there, and they did take from that tree. So this is the paradigm. The way to think of this is that people have their own spaces, and for me to go into that space is kind of a form of invasion. I'm invading their space. I'm taking what does not belong. Okay, consider the community area. Maybe there's a barbecue grill at the community area. Oh, what if I brought 10 pounds of ground beef into the community area, and I decided to have a barbecue for my neighbors? Now I've gone into that community space, and I'm inviting them into that community space differently than me going into their home and setting up shop and setting up residence in their home and taking advantage of their home. Consider my home. I wouldn't want my neighbors to come into my home and bring their ground beef and make a hamburger on my stove. That would be presumptuous. That would be wrong. Unless I invited them. What if I invited my neighbor into my home and I had a meal and I took my food and prepared it for him? So this is the way of analyzing this text. And it might call it the principle of the mine, ours, and yours. What is mine is within my property boundary. What is yours is within your property boundary. And what is ours is the community area. We have a community area, for example. Many of our communities down here in Southwest Florida, we've got like maybe a clubhouse, or we've got a community pool, or we've got a golf course, or a walking path, or even just a pond or a lake. And you can walk around the pond and look at the ducks or something. And it's a community area. You wouldn't go into your neighbor's property. You wouldn't want somebody coming into your property, but we have a community area that we're allowed to go. Look at the text, the pages of Leviticus 18. Look at the prescriptions on the proper respect of boundaries and restrictions. Everything can be analyzed within this perspective of what is mine and what is yours and what is ours. From this idea that it can all be analyzed from this perspective. And now we take it and we see that some people in the community are better off than others. Some people are more wealthy or have more authority. And yet, just because I may have more authority, maybe I'm the president of the community association or some silly thing, I'm not allowed to go into my neighbor's house and cook up a hamburger on his grill. That's presumptuous. Even if my neighbor is the most poor, I don't take advantage of him. Do you see how all these things, Leviticus 19:18, can be viewed through that idea of the mine, ours, and yours? Finally, the Olah offering is similar to the invitation of somebody to come into your home, of allowing somebody to come into your space and giving of your space to that person, setting that up. And this is the truth of it. That the Avodah ceremony, or the Avodah, ceremony, it is this place where the priest himself becomes the Olah. That he is invited into that space by Adonai, but he is invited there to become a poured out vessel. His entire life now is in the position of the ultimate high priest. And that's what we see that Yeshua becomes in his sacrifice. He becomes a higher sacrifice by first taking on the garment of humanity, but retaining his title and role as high priest, but becoming a high priest, a sacrifice in that place. He became the actual sacrifice. Yeshua is the sacrifice that the Avodah is pointing to. It is the ultimate atonement. He is both the blood poured out, as he spoke of, and he's also the scapegoat upon which our sins are placed and our sins are driven off into the wilderness. And that scapegoat is entirely burned up and consumed. It is lost to view. It is the abandonment of our sins. So this is what we have this week in these two parshas. And again, I just encourage you that Yeshua is found in these pages, in these parshas, in the Torah, and that you will, as you grow and as you learn to see it, you'll see him more and more in these pages. These pages are an adventure of peeling back the layers to see more and more of the truth of Adonai. So thank you for joining me tonight. It's been good, a good discussion. Again, a lot of material here. If you want to reach out, if you want to discuss this any further, if you want to tear apart the book of Esther and compare it to Leviticus 16, that's a great adventure. I'd love to go down that road with you further. Just reach out to me and we can walk through that. Again, a blessing to you. during this time of Corona. Just pray that you are well taken care of. Please, if you need anything, reach out to me and let me know. Through all the usual channels, you can text me or message me or email or call. We are available, so please let us know if there's anything we can do for you. Any comments, I encourage you to voice your comments after the teaching. And also, if you want to be notified of these messages and teachings and everything that we do here, please subscribe to the YouTube channel. This will send you a notification that there's a new video anytime that there is, and so you'll have access to that. Again, may the Lord bless you, the Lord keep you, the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May he lift up his countenance on you and give you rest, peace, shalom. Shalom, shalom, until we speak again.